Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update, and we have some good news. First, consumer confidence this week increased 3.2 points to 78.4, the highest it's been for 3 months, following a lower than expected ABS inflation reading for June. That lower than expected inflation prompted hopes among many that the Reserve Bank would no longer have to raise interest rates. And the back-to-back increases in consumer confidence over the last 2 weeks of 5.8 points is equal to plus 8%. And this is the largest percentage increase in the index for over 3 years since April 2020 and the early days of the pandemic. The Reserve Bank's decision today will obviously have a large bearing on consumer confidence next week. And however, despite this week's increase, consumer confidence is well below the neutral level of 100 and has now spent 22 weeks below 80. This length of time in recessionary territory has only happened once before, and that was during the 1990-91 recession. There was also good news for the Albanese government this week, with ALP support up 1% to 53%, compared to the Coalition on 47% on a two-party preferred basis. This is the first increase for the government since mid-June. Government confidence was virtually unchanged at 81.5 this week. And this is below the neutral level of 100 because a majority of 52% of Australians still believe the country's heading in the wrong direction. And only a third, or 33.5%, say the country's going in the right direction. There was a positive response across all housing categories to the last week's inflation number. So consumer confidence increased strongly for homeowners and renters and is now above 80 for both of these groups. The largest increase, though, was for people paying off their homes. That was up 4.5 points to 73.6, the highest for this group since April. Although the latest ABS monthly inflation was down, Australians are still expecting annual inflation to be 5.5% over each of the next couple of years, with the weekly ANZ Roy Morgan Inflation Expectations Index up 0.1 percentage points to 5.5%. And now turning to something we all look forward to, holidays and holiday destinations. For the first time since the pandemic, Melbourne has regained its spot as the preferred holiday destination of Australians. Now, 2.8 million Australians say they want to spend a night in Melbourne when they go on holiday in the next 2 years. The Gold Coast, which benefited from increased travel during the pandemic from the southern states, is in second place, just ahead of Sydney, with around 2.73 million Australians mentioning either of these destinations. In a clear fourth and fifth are Brisbane and Hobart, with just under 2 million preferring travelling to these cities in the next 2 years. Although Melbourne has regained top spot, the desire to travel to the Victorian capital, Melbourne, is still below pre-pandemic levels. In contrast, there are more people today saying they'd like to travel to Sydney, Brisbane and Hobart than there were before COVID-19. Turning now to our neighbours across the ditch. New Zealand faces an election in just over 2 months, and for the first time this year, one of the major parties has grabbed a potentially decisive lead. In July, support for a potential national ACT NZ coalition is 47.5%, and enough to gain a majority of seats at an election. This right-leaning coalition is now over 10 percentage points ahead of the governing Labor-Greens coalition on 35%. But support has continued to grow for the minor parties and is now at 17.5%, the highest in this term of Parliament. On these results, National leader Christopher Luxon is in the box seat to become New Zealand's 42nd Prime Minister in October. As a postscript, support for other parties is led by the Maori Party with 6% support and closely followed by New Zealand First on 5%. At those levels of support, Both parties will win seats in Parliament, but will not hold the balance of power. A further 6.5% of New Zealanders support another minor party. And that's a wrap for this week. Subscribe to our Roy Morgan YouTube channel. It's free for all the latest political, economic and market research data and insights. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to talking to you next week.